A decorated kernel, a single grainy photograph, and a snake so large that if it was in fact real, it would rewrite biology. Is this the story of the Katana, otherwise known as the Congo snake, or is it simply a trick of the light and some termite mounds? Wait around until the end because we are going to be getting into all the details, what was seen, and possible explanations. So let us set the scene for a bit. We are talking about the Belgium-occupied Congo. The year is 1959, over 60 years ago, and this is taking place near the Kamina Air Base. Now, a helicopter returns from a routine patrol. Inside this helicopter are men who have been hardened by war, men who have seen things that most other people perhaps should not have seen, and one of them was a very distinguished man. His name was Colonel Remy van Leerde. He had a very distinguished career. He was a fighter ace, a man with medals and a steadier eye than most. And he saw something on the ground, something that did not belong in any field manual that he was giving. There was no protocol on how to deal with what he saw, and he did not see it alone. Van Leerde and his companions reported would erupt into one of the most persistent mysteries in modern African cryptozoology, the Katana, or otherwise known as the Congo giant snake. A photograph exists, one frame. Is it a shadow among termite mounds, or is it a snake? That body, if the claim is true, is so large that it is longer than any living snake that we know of. This is the story of that photo, who took it, of what they told the world, and why scientists, skeptics, and storytellers are still arguing, talking about it, creating content about it 60 years later. So we have to talk about the man who was flying the helicopter and who gave an interview about what he saw, which I will link below. His name is Remy van Leerde, and he had flown hundreds of missions. He had flown fighter planes, test flights, V1 intercepts. He'd broken the sound barrier in 1958. He knew machines, he knew how to fly them. More importantly, he knew distances. He knew how the world looked from above while he was in the sky and how to estimate certain things. And this is going to become important for later on. Now, in 1959, in August, the story goes that Colonel van Leerde was flying back to Kamina Air Base. On board were other officers. So there are 3 other witnesses on board, which makes the eyewitness count up to 4. There was a Colonel Geersen, a Major De Vig, an engineer that went by the name of Kind, the only man with a camera that day. From several hundred feet up, they saw what one of them thought was a moving tree trunk. They circled to return to have a good look at it, and they apparently made several passes. That is when Kind snapped a picture. What the men would describe was a huge animal, dark green-brown in color with a white belly, a triangular head, perhaps 3 feet across. They estimated a length widely between 30 and 50 feet. Some would later say 100 feet, even 200 feet in the margins of the more sensational accounts. But from such a difference, with nothing to fix as a scale, those numbers are promises with no receipt at this moment. This photograph became a myth. Grainy, powerful, ambiguous, it shows a long, dark shape crossing open ground near what looks like termite mounds or scrub. But the image is an aerial shot. There is no ruler, no human beside the snake for scale, no measuring tape in the dirt. Technical notes later revealed that the camera was a Zeiss Icon Netax, a 6x6 lens 75mm, film developed with methanol U. The negative survived long enough to pass through several hands. It found its way into the files of Bernard Heuvelman, a man later called the father of cryptozoology. Now, Heuvelman would publish this full account in the 1970s. He examined the negative. He showed it to naturalists who had worked in the Congo. They saw trees and termite mounds. They saw something too large to be ordinary. Heuvelman concluded that it might be an oversized African rock python, An extreme specimen, but not one impossible to his thinking. Skepticism arrived quickly, but so did exaggeration. Ivan T. Sanderson, a name familiar to cryptid circles, pushed the story into the extraordinary. He suggested the photo implied a snake of 200 feet long. The claim leapt from specialist correspondence into the tabloids and then into the internet, where facts and fiction managed to sometimes feed each other and create false narratives. Other analysts struck to restraint. Wildlife photographer Ray Turkafs ran geometry on the image. He estimated the snake using plausible helicopter heights and camera angles at 12 to 14 meters, roughly 39 to 45 feet, if you accept the higher altitude estimates. If the copter had been lower, it might shrink to about 10 meters or around 32 feet. Even so, this puts the snake at something that is extremely big and exceptional, but within the wedge of what could argue could be a species of extreme rock python. But this is where the story splits. Even among those who believe an unusually large python could explain the photo, few accept the 50-foot number without reservation. And the hard line remains. No confirmed living snake has been scientifically measured at that length yet. So let's be plain. The largest living snakes that we can point to, the reticulated python and the green anaconda, can approach 36 feet in rare cases. Titanoboa, the extinct giant from the Pleistocene era, reached lengths between 42 and 47 feet. Titanoboa belongs in the fossil record, not in modern-day swamps, but this doesn't mean that it cannot exist. As South Africans, we have seen creatures that we thought that were extinct be revitalized, such as the coelacanth. Now, a living 50-foot snake would force biologists to ask tough questions. Where does it find enough food? How does a population persist without leaving other traces? How did such large animals invade hunters, herders, and researchers for decades in a region frequented by many people? Skeptics say that the simplest explanation, otherwise known as Occam's razor, is usually the likeliest or the most correct one. Misidentification, an optical illusion, scale problems, a shadow, a pile of termite mounds, a strip of riverbank seen at a strange angle. Stories don't grow in a vacuum. They germinate in culture. In Katana and across Central Africa, oral traditions include creatures that blur the line between animal and spirit. Local languages have names for very large pythons. The name Pumina, mentioned in colonial accounts, indicated a particularly notable python. The local communities, an unusual animal is not just curiosity, it carries meaning. It can be a warning, a story to teach to be cautious about certain rivers. To outside, those cultural layers can be misread as credulous superstition. But to understand what Van Leeuwenhoek photo became a legend, we must understand its cultural soil. We have one photo and multiple eyewitness claims. Here are the many explanations weighed and filed. So let's deal with the first one. An oversized African rock python. Pro, the pattern and shape are consistent with a large bow pythanoid. Hubelmans and some naturalists believes it fits within the extreme size rock python. Con, African rock pythons rarely, if ever, reach the claimed dimensions. No modern confirmed specimen exceeds roughly 20 to 30 feet. So for this, it would have to exceed another 20 feet in order to be an extreme example. Let's tackle the optical illusion claim. Termite mounds and vegetation. Pro. Termite mounds in the Katanga can be huge. Viewed from a distance and at the wrong angle, the landscape can form a false scale reference. Sanderson and others suggested the dark shapes might be mounds, not a serpent. Con. Local naturalists who saw the negative argued the dark form was organic. 3. Perspective and camera geometry error. So aerial photography without known altitude and focal length can widely skew perceived size. Small objects appear large, large objects shrink, different assumed heights produce very different length estimates. The con of this, though, is the negative and technical notes give some parameters. Even adjusted, results still point to an unusually large animal. Theory 4, hoax or photo manipulation. Pro. The image circulated through private hands, and sensationalists had incentive to exaggerate in the internet age, manipulated giant snake videos, proved how easily false evidence and narratives spread. The original negative was examined in the 1960s and 70s, and serious investigators treated it as genuine film, not as an obvious cut and paste forgery. This was before we had AI, this is before we had CGI, so the photograph, in my own opinion, does give it some credence. Theory number, let's look into the prehistoric relic theory. So pro to this theory is that the titanoboa shows that nature can produce extraordinary snakes, given the right climate and ecology. Con, the titanoboa is a fossil. The environment that allowed such size to exist no longer exists itself. There is no evidence that the Congo harbors relic megafauna on that scale. Now, memory is elastic. Witnesses reconstruct events the way the mind can best make sense of them. Men who have fought in wars carry stories of survival. They see danger where others see patchy shadows. The pilot had reasons to be credible. He had earned them. But credibility is not proof. A respected witness can still misread a scene. Then there is the human appetite for wonder. A photograph that hints at a monster sells better than a photograph that can be explained. This appetite is the exact reason why the Katana or the Congo snake, a recurring internet star in 2015, 2022, and again in the 2025, each time image recycled, reinterpreted, and sometimes digitally altered. So social media has given this photo a new life. Videos claiming to show a 50-foot python in the Congo went viral in 2023. Platforms flagged some of them as edited. Fact checkers examined the trail. The image hopped from Congo to Amazon and back, losing provenance with every share. When evidence is thin and desire is strong, narrative fills the gaps. The Katana snake still lives now in talk shows, podcasts, and comment sections as much as in any museum file. This case matters for the reasons beyond pure curiosity. It shows how a single piece of ambiguous evidence can multiply into folklore, pseudoscience, and cultural touchstones. It reveals that friction between local knowledge, colonial archives, scientific standards, and sensational media. It also exposes about how modern tools, satellite imagery, field biology, and digital forensics can test old claims, yet with even better tech. Some mysteries persist because they are as much about people as they are about animals. If you are a conservative scientist, the balance tips against a living 50-foot snake. There is no living measured evidence, no carcass, no repeatable observation. The ecological requirements are steep. The photographic ambiguity is real. If you are a sympathetic cryptozoologist, which is probably where my camp is at the moment, the photo is a tantalizing anomaly. It could be an extreme rock python or an unknown remnant. The photograph's provenance and the credibility of the witnesses give pause. There is also the middle ground that is the most honest place to sit. The photo shows something unusual and large. Exactly how large, we cannot say with certainty. The simplest explanations, perspective error, exaggerated witness estimates, as big but not as big as a mythical python, remain the most probable. Now, what would satisfy the scientific community? A corpse, DNA, clear multi-angle footage with verified metadata, a specimen examined by an independent herpetologist. Short of that, the claim remains a compelling mystery. Field teams could return to the area with targeted searches. Locals' oral histories could be recorded and cross-referenced. Satellite imagery might identify unusual underground patterns consistent with a large animal who perhaps slithers through the trails. But decades have passed, landscapes have changed. The termite mounds that once framed the scene may have shifted or been reclaimed by the land. Let's consider the men in the helicopter. They were far from home. They lived in a time of geopolitical upheaval. A 60-year-old grainy image becomes for many a symbol of unknown that still crawls just beyond the edge of maps. Of Africa, of a place of mystery, sometimes through the distorting lens of foreign appetite for the exotic. Whether the Katanga photo shows a giant snake, a trick of light, or a misread landscape, the story persists because humans like to believe that the world still hides one or two wonders from us, and because every culture needs its monsters. Now, what do you think? A 50-foot snake? A giant rock python? A perfect storm of shadows, termite mounds, and human error? Drop your theory in the comments, share any leads, local contacts, or archival sources you know. If you like this deep dive, hit the subscribe, ring the bell, and help us hunt for the next unsolved African mystery.